She walked into the restaurant like any other customer, calm, composed, just another face in the crowd. But what nobody knew was that beneath her quiet smile and steady eyes lay the instincts of one of the most elite warriors on earth. And when three men decided to make her their target, they had no idea they were about to learn a painful lesson in just 17 seconds. If you love your mom and dad, hit that subscribe button right now and show some love to her, because this story is about to leave you speechless. The restaurant buzzed with the kind of ordinary noise that came with a Saturday afternoon rush. Clinking glasses, the hum of conversations, the smell of fried chicken and coffee mixing in the air. It was the kind of place where people thought they were safe, where laughter drowned out the darker edges of the world. She sat near the corner booth, her posture calm, her eyes scanning the room not out of suspicion, but out of habit, because for her, awareness wasn't optional. It was survival. Her name was Sarah, a woman who looked no different from anyone else at first glance. Her long brown hair framed a face that didn't give away her story, but inside her bones was a history of combat, discipline, and nights spent staring down fear itself. Sarah was a Navy SEAL, one of the few women to make it through the grueling pipeline, and though she wore civilian clothes that day, the strength she carried was never something she could take off. Across the room, three men entered, their laughter louder than the rest, their energy carrying a sharp edge that unsettled the calm. They weren't just there for food or drinks. They were looking for someone to intimidate, to remind the world that they could control it, at least for a moment. One of them, tall with a cocky grin and a leather jacket, spotted Sarah sitting alone. His smile widened, not in kindness, but in the predatory way that spelled trouble. They approached her table without hesitation, their voices low but their intentions sharp. At first, it was casual, an unwanted comment, a lingering stare, a question she had no interest in answering. Sarah stayed quiet, her fork moving through her food as though they weren't even there, but her eyes, sharp as glass, flicked up once. That single glance should have been enough to warn them, but arrogance had a way of blinding men who thought they owned the room. "You're too pretty to be sitting here alone," one sneered, leaning down against her table. "Why don't you smile for us?" Another laughed and added, "She looks tough. Maybe she needs someone to break her in." The third pulled out a chair, uninvited, his arm draping across the back as though he already owned the space. Sarah set her fork down. In her mind, she measured the room. The exits, the distance between her and them, the reactions of the other diners who were now falling silent, sensing something was wrong but too afraid to step in. She had been in combat zones where bullets ripped through the air, but here, the danger wasn't about firepower. It was about intimidation, about three men who believed the odds were in their favor. Sarah's calmness was unsettling even to them. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but razor sharp. "You don't want to do this." They laughed, mistaking her warning for weakness. One reached for her wrist, a cocky grin spreading across his face. But the instant his hand touched her, the world flipped upside down. In less than a heartbeat, Sarah twisted his arm, slamming his hand into the table with such force that the wood rattled and his grin turned into a cry of pain. The restaurant gasped. Chairs scraped as people backed away. His friend surged forward, anger replacing arrogance, but Sarah was already moving. She stood, her body fluid, years of training snapping into place. The second man lunged, trying to grab her shoulder. She pivoted, her elbow driving into his ribs with a crack that stole his breath. He folded, clutching his side, while the third swung a fist meant to smash her jaw. But Sarah wasn't there anymore. She ducked, spun, and his knuckles slammed into empty air. In one swift motion, she caught his arm, pulled him forward, and drove her knee into his gut. He dropped to the ground, choking, his bravado gone. 17 seconds. That was all it took. The restaurant was silent, save for the groans of three men who thought they were predators, but had just been humbled by a woman they never should have touched. But Sarah didn't smile, didn't gloat. She stood tall, her breathing steady, her eyes sweeping the room to make sure no further threat remained. She wasn't there to entertain. She was there to survive, and in that moment, she had reminded everyone watching what survival looked like. Just when it seemed the moment was over, a twist hit the room. One of the men, the leader with a cocky grin, pulled himself up and reached under his jacket. Sarah's eyes locked instantly on the metallic glint of a knife. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Fear spread across the faces of diners. But Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her stance solid, her voice cutting the silence. "Drop it!" The man snarled, trying to salvage his pride, but Sarah's presence was a storm he couldn't fight. He lunged. Time slowed. To the diners, it looked like chaos. To Sarah, it was clarity. She sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted with precision. The knife clattered to the ground as his body slammed against the table, his breath knocked out of him. This time, she pinned him, her knee on his back, her hand locking his arm in a hold that made him scream. The crowd erupted, not in panic but in applause. People who had been frozen with fear now saw her not as a victim, but as a force of justice. The restaurant owner called the police, but Sarah already had control of the situation. When the officers arrived, the three men were writhing on the floor, humiliated and broken, their arrogance stripped away. The cops looked at Sarah, their eyes wide, and one of them asked, "Who are you?" She stood, brushing off her sleeves, her expression calm again. "Just someone who wanted to eat in peace," she said. But whispers had already spread. Someone had seen the way she moved, the precision, the efficiency that no ordinary civilian could master. Later, when the truth came out, that she had been a Navy SEAL, one of the most elite warriors in the country, the story exploded. News outlets covered it, social media buzzed, and people debated how such a woman could walk among them, invisible, until the moment she was forced to act. But Sarah didn't care about the attention. For her, it wasn't about proving herself. It was about survival, about standing up when no one else would. And though she never sought fame, the story of those 17 seconds became legend. Yet what most people didn't know was that her story didn't end there. The three men weren't just random troublemakers. They had ties, shady ones, to a bigger network that didn't take humiliation lightly. Days later, Sarah found herself followed, shadowed by unfamiliar cars, her instincts screaming that trouble wasn't over. And she was right. What had started as an ordinary meal in a restaurant spiraled into a web of danger far bigger than anyone watching that day could have imagined. But Sarah had faced worse. She had fought in deserts and jungles, against enemies who didn't play by rules. And if they wanted to come for her again, they would find out, just like those three men in the restaurant, that she wasn't someone to be underestimated. Because when you attack a Navy SEAL, even in civilian clothes, you aren't picking a fight. You're digging your own grave. And that's how a quiet afternoon in a small-town restaurant turned into a 17-second lesson the world would never forget. Now tell me, from which part of the country are you watching this video?